The following presentation is a Cyber Operations and Risk Management Briefing for the United Kingdom. Topics discussed will be software assurance needs and expectations, key attributes of the software development lifecycle or SDLC, known supply chain risks, vulnerabilities in existing software, software options identification, evaluation of software options, evaluation of supply chain options and recommendations, costs involved with each recommendation, recommendations for contract language that would be used to ensure that the supply chain system, network, and operational security needs are met. In conclusion, the presentation will conclude references used to help create this presentation. The National Software Assurance. The National Institute of Standards of Technology, or NIST, defines software assurance as a level of confidence that software is free from vulnerabilities either intentionally designed into the software or accidentally inserted at any time during its life cycle, and that the software functions in the intended manner. Software assurance, or SWA, also makes sure that software meets the necessary standards, requirements, and procedures. Software assurance ensures that software functions as intended by the user or purchaser. The different methods of software development are waterfall, prototype model, agile software development, rapid application development, dynamic systems development, spiral model, extreme programming, feature-driven development, joint application development, lean development, rational unified process, and Scrum development. There are pros and cons to each software development method. Customers want more secure software because of the increase in cyber attacks. One expectation for software assurance is that all stakeholders are made aware of the risks associated with the software. As soon as a new vulnerability is found with the software, all stakeholders will be notified. Only trusted supply chains will be used for software. The assurance of each component depends on the others. Part of software assurance is expecting and be ready for attacks. Attackers are constantly growing and changing their tactics. Confidence in the software is kept by keeping the number of vulnerabilities low or removing them completely. The attackers aim to compromise the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of the organization's network assets. For software assurance to work, there must be a balance between governance, construction, and operation of the software. The software assurance process is constantly changing, and continuous monitoring is necessary. Continuous monitoring will also help identify attacks early. This continuous monitoring needs to be in place from the very beginning. Auditing methods are used to ensure the organization is held accountable for their actions. The software development lifecycle has several key attributes. The image on the right shows a software development lifecycle. The goal of SDLC is to create the highest quality software in the least amount of time. The 7 stages of software development lifecycle are planning, analysis, design, development, testing, implementation, and maintenance. The stages of the software development lifecycle helps ensure that the software meets the demands of the customers. The first step, planning, is the most critical stage, and is when critical decisions are made. The scope of the project is also determined during the planning stage. During this stage, customer requirements are determined and it's highly detailed. Complete documentation is developed during stage 2, system analysis. After all the needs of the software are identified, they are compiled into the Validated Functional Requirement Doctrine, or FRD. The goal of this document is to provide guidance to users. Step 3 is system design. During this phase, prototypes are created and once finished, submitted to the client for approval. During stage 4, the development stage, functional needs are converted into computer codes. This is usually the longest stage of SDLC and is labor intensive. Stage 5 is when the testing and validation is completed. During this stage, the code is tested to ensure it performs as expected and required. Step 6 is the implementation and deployment stage. The code is deployed and the final tests are run. The application is released to the clients when all the testing is done. The last and seventh stage of SDLC is maintenance. Maintenance is when client issues are tended to and extra costs are addressed. The main software development models are Waterfall, Agile, and Spiral. We have chosen to use the Agile method. Key attributes of the Agile model are one phase has to be completed before you can move to the next and can be used on projects of all sizes. Changes can be made at any time during the development process. There is little documentation required by this model. The following image shows a life cycle of the Agile software development model. The stages are requirements, design, development, testing, deployment, and review. The model produces a high-quality product because testing is done at every stage. The model encourages customer involvement throughout the development. The transparent visibility associated with this model allows for early identification of issues or problems. Supply chain risk. Risk is defined as a probability of loss. The network of stakeholders that contribute to the software product is known as a software supply chain. There are different threats or risks associated with the supply chain. Attack vectors can stop critical software functions and should be taken into consideration during development. Some of the risks is during the design process. New vulnerabilities are created because of the changing technology world. A systematic approach for assessing and managing the software supply chain is being created by the Software Engineering Institute, or SEI. To help reduce supply chain risk, awareness needs to be raised. This can be achieved by stakeholders identifying the risks that are critical in the supply chain. Once the risks are identified, a mitigation plan needs to be created. The Carnegie Mellon Software Engineering Institute Software Supply Chain Project can be used to raise awareness of associated risks. The two main activities associated with the software supply chain risk assessment are to identify software supply chain drivers, and then supply chain drivers are analyzed. The drivers for the supply chain are identified during the first activity. The goal of the second assessment activity, analyze software supply chain drivers, is to evaluate how drivers are influencing the supply chain's core mission. Existing software vulnerabilities. The current software vulnerabilities are the supply chain, out-of-date patches or updates, lack of accountability, broken authentication or authorization, improper input validation, SQL injection attacks. Another software vulnerability is human factors. Human factors such as errors can lead to a vulnerability being exploited in a data breach. The weakest link in cybersecurity is humans. The four areas that humans are involved in during software development are individual, team, management, and stakeholder. Vulnerabilities associated with humans are incorrect identification of threats such as malware, security alerts are ignored, failure to do their job, configuring the system improperly, lack of knowledge, and poor relations with other members of the team. The supply chain has different vulnerabilities. Supply chain risks can come from other countries to disrupt business. The vulnerabilities in the supply chain are prime targets. Attackers use legitimate software packages to attack, so it can be hard to identify an attack. Out-of-date patches or updates can lead to vulnerabilities being exploited. There is also a lack of logs at the organization. Logging can help identify and trace a cyber attack. Broken authentication and authorization are also vulnerabilities. Broken authentication and authorization can lead to unauthorized data access. Improper input validation can lead to unexpected code being added to the application. This unexpected code can lead to the application crashing or data modification. Improper input validation can allow the malicious user to read sensitive data. SQL injection attacks is when a malicious user inputs code to run against the database. This type of attack is a well-known software vulnerability. An attacker can input malicious code through a web page or application. The last vulnerability that will be discussed is the lack of backups the organization has. The lack of backups can lead to data being lost. Examples of vulnerabilities that can lead to data loss are human error, mobile devices, natural disasters, malware, or cyber attacks and power outages. Vulnerability mitigation strategies. There are several steps the organization can take to protect against vulnerabilities. The regular training can reduce the vulnerabilities associated with the human factor. The organization should only work with known and trusted vendors in the software supply chain. Privilege credentials controls should be improved. Logs will be kept up to date to help identify cyber attack and to hold people accountable. To help protect against broken authentication and authorization, strong passwords should be used and session timeouts implemented. Discretionary access control should be put in place to protect against broken authorization. Current patches and updates should be updated as soon as possible to ensure that vulnerabilities do not get exploited. Encryption should be used to ensure that sensitive data is not lost. Encryption also ensures that only authorized parties have access to the data. Data validation can be used to protect against improper info validation. Whitelisting or blacklisting can be used to help prevent improper info validation. Testing can also be used against improper info validation. Different steps can be taken to protect against SQL injection attacks. The least privilege should be used with accounts that connect to the SQL database. Input supplied by a user should be validated and the database should not be shared. The web server also needs to be configured correctly to protect against data loss. Backup should be scheduled regularly. Any data that cannot be replaced easily needs to be backed up. Software options. There are different software development options available to the organization are waterfall model, prototype model, agile, spiral, extreme programming, feature-driven development, lean development, rational unified process, and Scrum development. Some good aspects of the waterfall model are easy to use and understand. Testing done after finishing every stage. Each stage has in-depth documentation. Cons of this type of model are issues need to be fixed within each stage, and testing is late in the building process. The prototype model allows customers to get an actual feel of the software. One con of the prototype model is that workflow can be easily compromised. Pros of the agile software development model are since it is adapted to the client needs, can be easily reached. Direct communication leads to no room for miscommunication or guesswork. Agile software development cons are lack of documentation and no clear picture of the outcome. A dynamic systems development model addresses the whole project lifecycle and business impact. This model allows users to be involved and better understand the software development process. Cons of this model are that it's expensive and unknown project lifetime. The spiral model allows the team to use more than one process model. Advantages of the spiral model are fast development and room for customer feedback. This approach is expensive and has an undetermined period of project lifecycle. Extreme programming focuses on the customer's interests and software engineers are involved in the process. The cons of the extreme programming model are future outcomes and exact possibilities are unknown. Feature-driven development model pros are the 5-step process can be completed in a small amount of time and helps move larger projects. Cons of this model are high dependency on main developer and little documentation. Lean development pros are early delivered product and the team members motivated. Cons of lean development model are successes in software development relies on how disciplined the team members are. Rational unified process model emphasizes correct documentation and is proactive to resolve product risk. Cons of the rational unified process model are development process is complex and unorganized. Pros of the Scrum development model are that the team makes the decisions. Cons of this model are not good for large projects and needs experienced team members. Recommendations for software and supply chain. The organization has chosen to use the agile method for software development. The Agile method allows developers to make changes at any time. Vulnerabilities can also be corrected as they come up. This model was chosen because of its reputation, and the chances of making errors are lower. The chance of making errors is lower because one phase is focused on at a time. Other recommendations for the organization are regular backups, continuous monitoring, patch management, data validation, and encryption. Backups should be conducted regularly and stored offsite. There should also be planning for the supply chain. The software developers should think like the malicious users to reduce vulnerabilities. Agile method recommendation costs. There are different costs associated with the recommendations that were mentioned previously. The number of vendors involved in the supply chain should be reduced. This will help reduce the cost of the supply chain. Patch management costs a good amount of money, but is worth it to protect the network. The above equation can be used to calculate the cost of patching. The cost of offsite backups is expensive. The Agile software development method reduces costs to the organization. However, if cyber incidents occur, the cost could increase. Since each stage is a predetermined amount of time, costs are predictable. Contract language. The organization should come up with contract language to ensure the supply chain, system, network, and operational needs are met. A contract is a binding agreement between the owner of the software and the buyer. The elements that form a legally binding contract are an offer, acceptance, intention to create a relationship, and considerations such as money. To ensure the contract is valid, all parties need to be in agreement. Support and maintenance expectations should be included in the contract. Expenses for all aspects of the software development should be included in the contract. Contract language should include a warranty. The warranty period should be between 90 days and 1 year. The language in the contract should specify the supply chain. The vendors in the supply chain are required to submit information on their ability to perform the required tasks for the software. The instructions should be clear. Directions on how to submit the first assurance case should be included. Conclusion. This presentation went over the needs and expectations of software assurance, software vulnerabilities and mitigation, software options and recommendations and costs associated with software in the supply chain. The organization will use the Agile software development model for software development. All patches on network assets should be kept up to date. The Agile method increases software flexibility. The following slides show the references that were used to help create the presentation.